Gonzaga hasn't lost back-to-back games since 2018, but the Garden's basically a home game for UConn. Something's got to give.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Friday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your host. This fine gentleman is Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making us your first listen or watch, and we want to remind you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all the everydayers joining us and all the great members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Check it out, Game Time. Andy, coming up on the show today, Friday, Sunday, kind of blah, the bread of the weekend. But man, that meat, that cheese, that lettuce, oh baby, it is so sexy this weekend, Andy. And that's what we're going to get into today, basically previewing Saturday. That's what we're doing today. Also, as of note, we are recording this prior to Iowa and Iowa State playing on Thursday night, so we don't have that result for you. Other than that, Thursday night was just kind of, anyway, Andy, so nothing too big. So got a lot of great stuff to talk about. We've got some rivalries this weekend. Three specific ones we'll look at. We've got Holiday Hoopsgiving. We got a bunch of teams just outside the top 25 playing ranked teams trying to get back into the voters' good graces. But Andy, where we want to start is we've got two ranked on ranked matchups this weekend. Earlier on Saturday at noon Eastern as part of the Indy Classic, actually kicking off the Indy Classic, is 17th Texas A&M against number 11 Purdue. But we want to start with the nightcap. This game's on Fox because, baby, this one, I am very excited. Number 8 Gonzaga, number 18 UConn at Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena, 8 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Ken Pom has it Zags -4. Andy, as we said in the cold open, the Bulldogs, I never called them that. The Zags coming off a loss and literally have not lost back-to-back games since 2018. They're going to lose. Is that going to be a new thing or where are we at?
Yeah, it's funny. Sean Farnham mentioned this on the broadcast during the battle for Atlantis after Gonzaga lost that game to West Virginia, which was obviously more of a surprising loss. I guess both losses were surprising Kentucky, not because of the opponent, but because they had an 18-point lead at one point. But Sean Farnham mentioned that Mark Few's team is historically excellent at rebounding from losses. And I wonder how much that has to do with the amount of time between losses, too, because rebounding to get to kind of when you're still angry about a loss almost feels easier in a way. Like these tournaments are always difficult. And obviously you just have to ask UConn about it because not every team rebounds from a surprising loss and still wins the rest of their games. But Gonzaga did in that tournament. And now they lose this game against Kentucky. It's a heartbreaking loss. It goes into overtime. They don't give up the lead until overtime, and then they're unable to crawl back into that game. It was just a devastating type of loss that we weren't expecting, and yet now they have to wallow in it for an entire week. They played that game on December 7th. They don't play this game again until December 14th. And when you look back in 2018, when they did lose back-to-back games, it was against two great opponents. They lost to Tennessee by 3, and then 6 days later, they lost a true road game against North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Again, Tennessee and North Carolina back in 2018, not bad losses by any stretch, but I wonder if that 6-day gap and then a long road trip, that kind of is pretty similar to the situation that they're finding themselves in here. Those games were both in mid-December. There's a lot of similarities in that kind of situation. So the good news for Mark Few and the Zags is that they're prepared, and he has seen this and he knows what it takes to get a W here. And I think ultimately, in terms of actually evaluating the game here, I think the big storyline is these are two of the best offenses in the country, according to Ken Pom and everywhere else, Evan Mia, Torvik, etc. But the analytics favor Gonzaga's defense quite a bit more than UConn's. I believe as of this recording, UConn is 93rd in adjusted defense.
They've moved up too, Andy. They're 91st right now.
Okay, so never mind. 91st in adjusted defensive efficiency for Danny Hurley's team. And look, I'm absolutely confident, convinced that they will be in a much, much better spot by the time February and March rolls around, because Danny Hurley is one of the best in the business, and they're going to find ways to improve on that end of the floor. But the fact of the matter is they're not great right now on defense, and they're playing the best offensive team that they have played this year, and they've played some good ones. But I think Gonzaga is going to have ways to exploit this team's defense, and the pressure is on Hurley and the Huskies to figure out how to be more impactful on that end of the floor, because they're going to get their points even against Gonzaga's quality defense. They're going to score plenty of points, but I don't think they're going to score 90 or 95. And if Gonzaga gets that many, I think it's really hard for UConn to win this game.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me, Andy, because and when you say these are two really good, these are offenses number 2 and 3 at KenPom.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we're talking elite of the elite right here.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, you know, we've been talking about it all season with UConn, is there's not Donovan Clingan hanging out back there waiting to erase everything. And what happens when Ryan Nembhard's getting to the rim, or if Ike's getting position inside and doing what I mean, there's just all of these scenarios where it's like, oh boy. Now, one thing that I think does skew a little bit in UConn's favor is the building, right? Yeah. Like this is literally on the other side of the country for Gonzaga, whereas UConn, it's just, you know, a little train ride down. I guess you can probably take a train. I don't know the Northeast Seaboard and how that works, but like it very, very much a home game for UConn, just going into the city there. So that certainly does play a factor. But like, aside from that 3-game losing streak, UConn has been starting to play better. We've talked about this 3-game stretch for UConn and how it would be telling of, are they coming back around? Well, they beat Baylor at home. Then they went and beat Texas even more convincingly on the road, last Sunday. And then now they've got this one. And the thing is, though, as you said, this is by far the toughest of those 3 games for UConn. And Andy, I expect a very close back and forth game here.
Yeah, me too. And I think, you know, the front court is where I think a lot of this is going to be determined. And I think a lot of people will look at Samson Johnson and Terrace Reed, who are not the same level of defenders as Donovan Clingan. And it's not a knock on them. Donovan Clingan was exceptional in the front court, but Graham Ike has been inconsistent this year for Gonzaga. He had a phenomenal second half against San Diego State, but in his first few games outside of that was kind of hit and miss, was not looking quite like himself. But against the number 1 rated defensive player in the country, according to Evan Miyakawa's website, Amari Williams at Kentucky, Graham Ike scored 28. Like, he had a monster game against one of the best front court players that he's going to face all year long. Now, Mark Pope is notorious for not double teaming, and I think Graham Ike is a player who there's very few one-on-one defenders in the country who can stop him in that situation, and that was proven on Saturday against Kentucky. So I'm very curious how Danny Hurley and UConn attacks him, if they do something different. They didn't have to double team him last year when they played in Seattle because they had Donovan Clingan. So to me, that matchup is going to be critical. I'm also very curious to see Aiden Mahaney, who has been mostly not good for UConn. He had a strong game against Baylor, but he has struggled outside of that. He has been a problem in UConn's defense. He played very well against Gonzaga for 2 years at St. Mary's. He had his best games against Gonzaga. You could tell that rivalry meant a lot to him, and he really wanted to play up for it. So I'm curious if that translates over, if he has a big game, or if the familiarity that Nembhard and Hickman have playing against him, and the fact that in previous games when Mahaney wasn't doing enough defensively, Danny just yanked him and just didn't play him. And I think it's going to go one of 2 ways. Mahaney's going to have the best game of his career, or at least of his season for UConn, or he's going to be benched for the majority of the second half. To me, it feels like it's one or the other. And I think that which one of those it is going to be a big factor in who ultimately wins this game.
Just one quick thing before we move on to Indy Classic. This is UConn's last non-con game of the season. They're into Big East play the rest of the year after this, starting with Xavier at home on Wednesday. So that's something to keep in mind. As for Gonzaga, they do have one more big non-con opportunity against UCLA on December 28th. So 2 weeks after this game. But outside of that, this is Gonzaga's last chance to pick up like a critical big time non-con victory. They've got several others. Obviously, Baylor, Arizona State looks better by the day. San Diego State and Indiana. Those are nice big wins. But this, I think, this and the Baylor games would clearly be the biggest wins for Gonzaga in the non-con. Andy, let's go to Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis, where we're going to have the Indy Classic. Later on, the second game of this is Wisconsin, who's trying to get off the schneid from a 3-game losing streak against Butler. That's a 2:30 tip, approximately, depending on when this game gets done. The big storyline there, will Wisconsin be able to avoid a fourth straight loss? Andy, we're not going to talk about that one anymore, though, because we've got 17th Texas A&M against number 11 Purdue in their footprint. Noon Eastern on CBS. Ken Palm has it. Boilermakers -2. Andy, I'm really intrigued to see this backcourt matchup between two very different guards in Wade Taylor Fourth and Braden Smith.
Yeah, that's the storyline in this game, I think. And I've said this a few times about Texas A&M. And interestingly, one of the other teams that I would say this about is Butler, in the sense that they're two teams that we've seen them kind of prove that they can beat just about anybody. And we've also seen them prove that they can kind of lose to just about anybody. And that's a step up for Butler from where they were previously. And it's kind of the same as where Texas A&M was last year. It felt like Buzz Williams' team was, you're like, all right, they're rolling, they're beating a lot of good teams, they're playing well, and then boom, they lose a game that they have no business losing. And then they're playing a team that you're like, oh, there's no way they're going to beat so-and-so. And then they do. Like, they're just, they seem to play up well to strong opponents. They seem to flounder against teams that they shouldn't be floundering against. It seems like it's starting to become a bit of a pattern for them. But if that holds true, then they're probably going to play this Purdue team really, really well. And I think it is absolutely going to come down to that battle between the guards, Taylor and Smith. And I think the three-point shooting for Texas A&M is always the big question mark, a team that is so volatile in that area. That's where you see those kind of wide spreads and everything. And I think for Purdue, they have seemed to get more consistent. Trey Kaufman-Wren has been a wonderful replacement for Zach Edey. I think we kind of expected that would happen. That's what happens in Matt Painter's system so consistently. And Smith and Lawyer, now in their third year, are just playing some phenomenal basketball right now. And of course, there's some great role players on that team, as there always is. So I'm favoring Purdue. I think Purdue's going to win. But if there's any team that I would expect to pull what isn't really a significant upset, but is a bit of an upset, certainly Texas A&M is capable of doing so.
Yeah, TKR, if he can have his way in the front court, I'm curious to see what Henry Coleman and others can do with him. That could also be what sways this game if it's a push in the backcourt.
Well, Isaac, a handful of teams are just outside the top 25, and they have an opportunity to knock off ranked opponents on Saturday and vault themselves back into the good graces of the AP voters. So which one of them is going to take advantage? We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, college basketball season is here, and there is nothing better than the atmosphere of a college basketball game. The anticipation of what's about to happen, the energy of the crowd, the unexpected coming to life, thrilling wins, and more. And Game Time now has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of different tickets. And it's not just for college basketball. You can get tickets to concerts, to comedy shows, to theater, and more. So whether it's Game Time's ticket coverage, their lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat in the app, Game Time has you covered. And if you heard us talking about Gonzaga, UConn, you're in the New York area and you want to go check out some high-level hoops, you can still get 2 tickets to the Madison Square Garden to watch this game on Saturday for $49 a piece in section 417. They also got 2 tickets down on the baseline for just $122 a pop. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? Game time. All right, Isaac, moving on from the 2 ranked games that we got this weekend on Saturday to talk about some other games that aren't quite ranked matchups, but are teams that are close to being in the top 25, either that were and fell out, that are receiving votes but aren't quite in that conversation. Many of these teams who have opportunities to pick up marquee wins that would very likely, if not certainly, put them back into the top 25. I'm going to rattle off these games. And then, Isaac, we can kind of pick and choose which games we want to focus on here. First off, we got the number 1 team in the country, Tennessee, the Vols, coming off a win over Miami in the Jimmy V Classic. They're going to take on Illinois at Illinois. That game is at 5:30 Eastern time on Saturday. On Fox, Ken Palm favors the Vols by just 3. And then we got the 6th-ranked Marquette Golden Eagles going on the road to take on Dayton. Shout out Shaka Smart for being willing to go play the Flyers out of the A-10 in a true road game. That's at 7 p.m. Eastern time on the CBS Sports Network. Ken Palm favors Marquette by just 1. And then we have matchup of the Tigers versus the Tigers, Memphis at Clemson. 11 a.m. on Saturday on ESPN2. Clemson's ranked 16th. Memphis just fell out of the top 25. Ken Pom favors Clemson to win that one by 7.
Andy, that's typically what happens when you lose to Arkansas State. That's typically fall out.
That typically tends to do it. Yeah. Speaking of teams that have lost too many times to be in the top 25, Arizona hosting UCLA, the 24th ranked Bruins, in a matchup that used to be a conference matchup for 100 years and is now not a conference matchup. That game at 3 p.m. on Saturday on ESPN2. The Wildcats, the unranked team here, favored by 1. And then we got Creighton in the midst, both these teams, frankly, in the midst of their ridiculous non-conference schedules. Creighton going on the road to take on Alabama, the 7th ranked Crimson Tide, 8:30 Eastern on Saturday on the SEC Network. Ken Pom favors Bama by 11 in that one. And then on Friday, one of the 9 games on Friday, Indiana at Nebraska in Big Ten action. Ken Pom favors the Cornhuskers by 1 in that one. Isaac, a lot of fun matchups here. What are you most intrigued by?
And we should note that that last game is one where it's not, Indiana's not playing a ranked team, but still Indiana getting into that. There's all 5 of these, Andy, of the teams against a ranked one. Man, there are intriguing storylines. I think I'm actually most interested in Tennessee at Illinois. Yeah. Tennessee backed up and validated their number 1 ranking by kind of handling Miami quite easily in the Jimmy V Classic on Tuesday night. Meanwhile, Illinois was at home handing Northwestern one of those losses, Wisconsin one of those losses we just talked about. But now Illinois gets to stay home and welcome in the Vols to Champaign. And I think were this game in Knoxville, I'd be a little bit less intrigued by it. But man, Illinois getting to have the number 1 team in the country at their house has all sorts of intrigue to me, in a way that, I know they're young. You got so many young leading scorers along the way. Will Riley came off the bench in that most recent game, interestingly. But Tennessee, man, they got it going. It's not just Zakai Ziegler. It's Igor Milicic stepping up and doing some big things. It's, all of this stuff that's allowing Tennessee to come together as a team. Leaf and I were talking about on Wednesday, Andy. It's not like last year where, Chaz Lanier, I think we think is the head of the snake in terms of biggest dynamic scorer, but they don't have to rely on him as heavily as they did Connect last year. And I think that's important for this team, especially in a road environment.
Yeah, I think it's a fun matchup of a veteran team, although not a team with a ton of continuity in Tennessee. Obviously, they have Ziegler and Gainey and Meshack and those guys who've been around, but they also have Milicic is new, and then Chaz Lanier is new, but they're veteran guys who've played a lot of college basketball, going on the road against a team that is a lot younger with Will Riley for Illinois and then Kasparis Jakusionis and Timislav Ivasic. Like, this is a young team, but they're coming together well. They're gelling together. You can see it. For Brad Underwood and the Illini. I like Tennessee to win this one because they're the more experienced team, and I think Illinois is going to struggle defensively to stop Tennessee. That's been an issue for them for many years, really, but it's been an issue for them this year as well. And then I think the youth is just enough that I favor Tennessee, but that's going to be a really good game. And it's kind of I don't want to say it's a win-win for Illinois. Certainly there's a possibility that they get blown out and that it doesn't go well for them, but it's such a great learning experience for them and their young players to get this opportunity to play this really well-coached and balanced and just veteran team in Tennessee. So I think this is the kind of game that, regardless of how it goes, it helps make Illinois better for March, and that's ultimately going to be, Brad Underwood's goal for that one. So I'm excited about that matchup, but I also want to talk about
what stands out to you?
Yeah, I think it's got to be Marquette at Dayton. I'm so intrigued by Marquette at Dayton, and I really like all these games. I would have picked Creighton at Bama if Pop Isaacs were healthy, but the loss of Pop Isaacs just really kind of deadens the excitement for that game. Obviously, if Creighton pulls it off, which they are still very capable of doing, that's a really nice win for them without him, but it seems a lot harder to do without a player like him. But for me, Marquette going on the road to take on Dayton, it's Big East versus A-10, 2 of the best non-football conferences in the college basketball space. Dayton has already played a tremendous schedule with their games from the Maui Invitational and really close losses to North Carolina and to Iowa State. And for Marquette, a team that's also already played Iowa State and has already played a really tricky schedule with Maryland and Purdue and some of the others. I really am interested in this matchup. I'm interested to see if Dayton can hold steady on their home floor. I think Marquette's going to win, but again, KenPom favors Marquette just by 1. It's one of those games where it's another really good test for Shaka Smart's club and a good opportunity for Dayton to either potentially pick up a huge win, which helps their resume and helps the A10 standing overall, or just get better and more prepared for March.
Yeah. Well, Andy, obviously all those games are going to be a lot of fun to watch on Saturday, but Saturday also has a trio of rivalry games. Is it going to be one of those where we throw out the record books? Because who knows, or are these going to kind of be the beatdowns that they are on paper? We're going to try to figure that out coming up in just a second. But first, let me tell you about FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers, when you place a $5 bet, let's say that bet wins, which would not be me because never, you're going to get $150 back in bonus bets. Man, the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. It's this great one-stop shopping. So not only can you place bets on this one page, but then you can also check out the play-by-play. You can see live stats in real time and so much more. Again, right there on that same page where you place your bets. How about the Final Four odds for those 4 ranked teams playing each other that we talked about earlier? Gonzaga leads the way out of that quartet with plus 240, then UConn at plus 420, then Purdue drops off to plus 1,300, and A&M rounds out that bunch at plus 1,800. If you want to get in on those Final Four odds or national championship odds, whatever else, go check it all out at FanDuel.com. Never miss a moment and never waste a hunch, and go make every moment more with FanDuel. It's an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Andy, we haven't even really begun to touch all the gloriousness of Saturday's slate yet, because next we want to get to 3 big-time rivalry games that are happening. 2 of them on campus sites, one of them a neutral site because it's now no longer a conference game. So we've got Louisville heading to number 5, Kentucky. That's 5:15 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. We've got Xavier at number 22, Cincinnati, 2 p.m. on ESPN+. That one is nasty, man. That rivalry is just woof. And then the one that's a neutral site because it's no longer a conference game, number 13, Oklahoma against Oklahoma State. That one's at 8 Eastern on ESPNU. It's actually going to be played in Oklahoma City at the Paycom Center where the Thunder play. Andy, like out of these lines, it's funny because the Oklahoma rivalry game is the smallest KenPom line out of all 3 of these. Not Louisville at Kentucky. Wildcats favored by 11 there. And in the Xavier-Cincinnati game, Cincinnati's favored by 9 in that one. What do you make of this troika of games?
Yeah, I would have guessed that Xavier-Cincinnati would be the closest line. And I think, again, we're using KenPom lines, so FanDuel lines might be a little bit closer. But for me, like, Cincinnati's been good. Don't get me wrong. They've obviously played really well, and they're just getting Dan Skillings back. He played his second game of the season against Howard on December 8th, so he's just kind of getting back into the mix. But Xavier has been inconsistent this year. They haven't been as advertised. I know a lot of people had them in the top 25 early in the year. They've kind of fallen out of that conversation. But this is a heated rivalry, like you said. It's a matchup where these teams are going to play up. I expect Xavier fully to play up in this matchup, even on the road. I think they have the pieces to potentially contend with Cincinnati. I think this is a really, really fun game. And I would have expected that line to be a little bit closer, although I do still think Cincinnati, by virtue of being at home, not just because they're the ranked team, if they were flipped, if this game was at Xavier's house, I think they would win it still. But I think that that's going to give a little advantage to Cincinnati. We also just found out recently that sophomore Trey Green for Xavier is taking an indefinite leave of absence. He wasn't a big-time player for Xavier, but it does hurt their depth, and considering the amount of injuries and various issues that have gone on for Sean Miller's club the last 2 years, I'm sure they're not happy to have another player not be available for them in this game. But again, Louisville, Kentucky would be most exciting game here. It might still end up being the most exciting game, but unfortunately with Case and Pryor and with Corin Johnson both out for Louisville for the rest of the season, it's just a lot harder to feel particularly and again, if they were flipped, if this game was at KFC Yum Center, maybe you'd have a little bit more confidence. But for Louisville, a road game against a team that is absolutely rolling in Mark Pope's Kentucky Wildcats, without their full roster for Louisville, it's just hard to feel super confident in their ability to go get a W here. But this is a rivalry game for a reason. Who knows? Maybe they'll go pull it off.
We will wait and see on that. Andy, also kind of a rivalry game that I had just remembered is happening is Georgetown and Syracuse are playing on Saturday.
Yeah.
And so that one's going to be fun as well. It's kind of worthy of inclusion in a rivalry segment.
Fun's maybe not the word I would use to describe Georgetown.
That's fair. Hey, down in Atlanta, we got the Indy Classic going on at Gainbridge. Down in Atlanta, we got Holiday Hoopsgiving at State Farm Arena there where the Hawks play. Ohio State and number 2 Auburn tips things off at 1 p.m. Eastern on ESPN2. And then following that is Arizona State at number 9 Florida, 3:30 Eastern. That one switches to SEC Network. Andy, preseason, I think I would have taken Ohio State at Auburn as the most interesting of this game, but that's two teams that are seemingly going in different directions at this point. But Arizona State and Florida are both teams that are ascending. I think I'm actually more excited about that one.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Florida is going to win it, but we've seen this Arizona State team. They played really well against Gonzaga, and that was a home game for Gonzaga. So to play that team well, I mean, they were in that game with like 90 seconds to go. It ended up being an 8-point win for the Zags, but really only because of free throws at the very end. So Arizona State beat St. Mary's, who's a very good team. Like, this is a team that has played extremely well this year. Their 2 freshmen, Jaden Quintance and Sosan, I can't remember his first name, have played extremely well as of late. And I just think that's a team that could really give Florida some fits. But what I love about this Gators team is they're so old. I mean, Walter Clayton's been around for a while. Will Richard's been around for a while. Elijah Martin is a veteran guard, and they have some really phenomenal kind of flying under the radar front court player in Alex Condon, who has just been really, really solid. He's really high efficiency. He puts up big numbers in like 22, 25 minutes per game. I think how he is able to play and what he's able to do against somebody like Quintance feels like the really big storyline in that matchup. So yeah, I agree. I'm more excited about that. I do still think Florida wins, but I'd be more excited about Ohio State Auburn if Ohio State hadn't kind of fallen off the wagon a little bit as they have lately. They're a good team with talented players, but the 2 front court additions, we don't know exactly the status with Aaron Bradshaw right now, but he's not playing. And when he was playing, he wasn't playing very good. And Sean Stewart hasn't been playing very good either. And it's a bummer because I think if Jake Dietler's team hit on one of those guys, we'd be having a different conversation about them. But as it stands right now, it's hard for me to see them finding a way to take down Bruce Pearl's Auburn team.
Andy, Florida has to turn right around and play North Carolina in the Jumpman Invitational on Tuesday in Charlotte. So that's a really maybe non-con defining couple days for Florida here. And then as for Ohio State, they've lost 2 of their last 3. They lost to Pitt and Maryland, just beat Rutgers last Saturday. But after Auburn, 2 of their next 3 are Auburn and Kentucky. So, man, just kind of a brutal slate for this team. And we'll see what happens there. Outside of Holiday Hoopsgiving, just a couple others to be aware of. NC State is at number 10 Kansas, 3:15 p.m. On ESPN. It's funny, Kansas now will have welcomed in both North Carolina and NC State to Allen Fieldhouse this offseason. Andy, look, NC State made that Final Four, had that great run, won the ACC tournament. And any hope for Kevin Keatts' team here going into Allen Fieldhouse, in your opinion?
Not really. No, I mean, I think they could keep it competitive. I think we've seen Kansas let teams hang around a little longer than they should. And we've also seen Kansas have really dominant second halves. They had a dominant second half against North Carolina. Frankly, they had a dominant second half against Missouri. It just wasn't enough because they got down too much in that game. But that's a rivalry that had some extra heat on it. I could absolutely see NC State making this game look surprising at halftime. And we're going to have people on social media raising their eyebrows as Kansas cooked, what's going on? And then ultimately Kansas wins by 15. That feels like that's just a prediction, but that feels kind of how this game is going to go. And if it does, eventually we have to have a conversation about why is Bill Self's team continuing to let these teams hang around
mediocre,
so much for them. But it is concerning to see them do that. But, they need to play a full 40 minutes. I think they'll still win against NC State, even if they don't play a full 40. But at some point you got to start doing that. I just don't think NC State's good enough to really hang with them.
Yeah, Ken Palm has it Kansas minus 13. And so you're right in line with that, with getting to that 15-ish kind of number. Andy, one other thing this weekend, and then we just a couple wrap up quick hitter points. There's the MKE tip off at Fiserv Forum where the Bucks play on Sunday. And we've got Akron at Milwaukee to kick things off at 1:30, followed by Georgia Tech Northwestern. We do have that like high major battle of really smart kids. And then, but I think the highlight game, even though we've got that high major game, is San Francisco and Loyola Chicago at 7:30 Eastern. That one's on ESPN Plus. So Andy, just something for folks to be aware of there.
Yeah, some fun games here. I'll say very quickly, shout out San Francisco for putting together the kind of non-conference schedule they need to put together in order to get an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament. They've played Memphis, they've played Clemson, now they're playing Loyola Chicago, they're playing some other quality teams as well. They probably needed to win most, if not all of those games. They haven't yet. So this Loyola Chicago game becomes very critical for them. But the way the A-10 is shaping up, this would be a really nice win for either team, frankly, coming from two of the better mid-major conferences in college basketball.
Andy, before you get us out of here, 3 very quick bullet points. Charlie Baker, NCAA president, has started talking NCAA tournament expansion again. He's saying basically like, hey, we're not going further than 76, but come on, man. The movie was great the first time. We don't need the sequel, right? We need nice things. Achor, the Samford transfer to Kansas State. Remember, we've talked so much about that front court has got too much dudes in it with he and Coleman Hawkins and Ugana Onyenso. Achor had been the odd man out in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, he is dismissed from the team. We don't have details as of this time. And then finally, the WCC is filing a lawsuit against Grand Canyon. If you want to hear more on that, I would suggest you go check out Andy's Locked On Zag show from this week, where he's talking more about that in depth.
That's going to wrap it up for us today, folks. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We have an incredible slate of basketball games on Saturday. Just park yourself in front of that TV, get some hot cocoa, whatever you need. Watch yourself a ton of basketball games. And then we will be back next week, recapping these games, getting you ready for the rest of the week, getting you into your holiday with some more fun non-conference games and more conference games as we start to see those coming together for some of the other high major conferences as well. We want to say, as always, apologies to the Lawyer family, even if we like Purdue in that game against Texas A&M. We'll say let's go Wildcats in their rivalry game against Louisville. And until Monday, peace out.